may say that rules are made to be broken. Although this seems to be little more than a flimsy excuse to not play fair, employed by the rule breakers themselves, it would seem that a number of TV characters have taken this to heart over the years. Now, we're not talking about breaking laws here, per se. Instead, we're talking about characters who have gone out of their way to impose certain rules and restrictions upon themselves, only to then break them. There's nothing quite like a good contradiction. So I'm Gareth, you're watching What Culture, and here are 10 TV characters who broke their own rules. Number 10, Rick used time travel, Rick and Morty. Fans of Rick and Morty quickly found out that the former is a man of some very strong principles. He doesn't believe in school or the education system. He believes that he is the smartest man in the universe, and he has a distinct hatred for time travel. Rick has said that he doesn't respect time travel, because if Ant-Man and the Wasp can do it, then he's not interested. However, in spite of such a claim, and the creators of the show holding similar reservations, Rick has in fact traveled time. In the very first episode, no less, on the very first adventure of the series, Morty breaks his legs after a horrific fall. Rick uses his portal gun to go to a future dimension where they have a cure. Rule broken immediately then. Then there's season 4's Rattlestar Rick Lactica, where the titular heroes are forced to keep traveling back in time to interact with previous versions of themselves while trying to set right a crumbling serpent society, including the cliched one last trip back to tie everything up at the end. Maybe Rick isn't quite as principled as he likes to think. Yeah, maybe. Number 9, Walter White got greedy, Breaking Bad. Walter White's downward spiral, or upward spiral depending on your perspective, in Breaking Bad helped to constitute one of the most compelling character arcs in the history of television. Initially a meek and underpaid chemistry teacher, Walt's cancer diagnosis changed everything. Aiming only to earn enough money to make sure his family would be okay once he was gone, Walt entered this incredibly dangerous new world alongside Jesse Pinkman with one figure in mind: $737,000. After some rough calculations, Walt decided that this was the magic number that should make sure everything was sorted for his family after his death. However, his new life became deeper rooted in him than he ever imagined. White loved the money, the power, the danger, and soon he eclipsed his magic number and made no attempts to stop. Even after he went into remission and no longer needed to worry about what he was leaving behind, Walter's rule was long broken. Ultimately, he went on to make more money than he could ever need, more money than he could ever spend, and more money than he and Skylar could ever launder. Now, Bryan Cranston gives one of the greatest TV performances ever as Walter White in Breaking Bad, and it was one that shocked a lot of people, which brings me to my question: which TV performance caught you off guard for how good it was? Let me know in the comments down below. Number 8, Dexters Victims, Dexter. There are plenty of TV shows based around protagonists that break the law, with several of them featured on this list. However, there needs to be something more than just the criminal aspect. There needs to be some mitigating factor that will still allow audiences to connect. And in the case of Dexter Morgan, this was his code. Dexter, the blood spatter expert who worked with the Miami Metro Police, was something of a killer with a conscience. Thanks to a list of rules set out for him to follow by his adoptive father Harry, Dexter was only to murder killers who were never punished by the law. Across 8 seasons, as well as New Blood and Original Sin, Dexter's kill count was obviously very high, and will be added to in the upcoming Resurrection. And in all this time, his code was broken on multiple occasions, and for a multitude of reasons, all of which are listed online if you go looking for them. We'd be here for a while if we looked into it in this video. Of course, then there was the rule that should have gone without saying, but was a rule nonetheless, in that he should absolutely not get caught. Though he ultimately managed to evade justice, Dexter broke the golden rule. His identity as the Bay Harbor Butcher was found, and he was then sent into hiding. Number 7, Barney Stinson broke the bro code, How I Met Your Mother. Of the core 5 characters in How I Met Your Mother, it would be genuinely difficult to define any of them as particularly likable. Barney Stinson in particular had far more vices than virtues, including but not limited to how he treated women and how he viewed friendship. Barney lived his life by certain rules that he took very seriously, some of which were written down in a literal, physical bro code he claimed was written by his ancestor, Barnabas Stinson. Right. The most ridiculous part of this was that he genuinely believed believed his friend should also follow these rules without question. Some of the articles included were bros before hoes, that a bro's mom is always off limits, and that there is to be no eye contact during a devil's three-way. One of the key ones stated no sex with your bro's ex. But in season 3, Barney broke this rule when he slept with Ted's ex-girlfriend, Robin. So serious was the breach of the rules that he and he alone cared about, that he even hired Marshall in a legal capacity to try and find some loophole to rid him of any guilt he was feeling. Of course, he couldn't. Ted Mosby was an exceptional friend to Barney, and had never so much as bent a single rule of the bro code, while Barney, the one who took it more seriously than anything, did much worse than that. Shame. Number 6, Professor Farnsworth altered the past, Futurama. While most of the entries on this list feature rules a character has put in place over their lives in general, this one was focused around one particular scenario in one particular episode, namely when Roswell the Enswell saw the Planet Express crew go back in time to New Mexico 1947. As the undisputed authority on all things scientific and, well, weird, Professor Farnsworth immediately established a key rule: don't do anything that alters the past. With Fry's grandfather, Enos, stationed at Roswell, the professor used the analogy that if he were to kill his own grandfather, then he would cease to exist. Well, Fry did a whole lot worse than that. Not only did he get Enos killed, he offered comfort to his future grandmother Mildred by sleeping with her, after his survival convinced him that she couldn't really be his grandma. Turns out she was, and that Fry just made himself his own grandpa. Ew. After all that, the professor decided that there was no point in anyone else keeping to the altering the past rule, and so he happily stole a microwave dish from the army base to get them back to the future. You can break rules as long as someone else breaks them harder, apparently. If you're finding this video about characters who broke their own damn rules quite fascinating, then prepare to be even more fascinated by more What Culture videos. Just click on that subscribe button and thank me later. Number 5, Frank Castle helped Daredevil. Daredevil. After fighting tooth and nail to get Wilson Fisk put behind bars, Charlie Cox's Daredevil came up against a very different, yet strangely familiar foe. The organized crime of the Kingpin was replaced by Matt Murdock's new priority, the Punisher. Frank Castle's family had been killed in a crossfire months earlier when a drug deal between 3 gangs and a handful of brokers went south. Using his military skill and training, and sheer ruthlessness, Frank took to hunting down and killing anyone and everyone who had anything to do with the day he lost his wife and children. At one point, it seemed as though Karen Page found herself in the Punisher's crosshairs when she was trying to protect the real target, Grotto. However, as Frank later confessed, she was never in any danger. He wasn't some nut who went around killing for fun. He had a specific list of targets to kill, and that was it. Much of the story and the theme of Daredevil's second season was just how thin the line between Frank and Matt was. They did the same thing essentially, only Daredevil drew the line at killing. Frank seemingly had his own line until he crossed it when he gunned down several members of the Hand in order to help Daredevil. They had nothing to do with the slaughter of his family, yet they die by his hand all the same. Line crossed. Number 4, Bojack Horseman drank again. Bojack Horseman. You'd be forgiven for making certain assumptions about a TV show based around a talking horse-human hybrid whose best friend was a dog called Mr. Peanut Butter. Said assumptions being that Bojack Horseman wouldn't be so deep and so damn dark as it was. The show covered many different subjects and themes throughout its outstanding 6-season run, including imposter syndrome, depression, and substance abuse, among many others. Most of these Bojack himself suffered through, before ultimately getting sober and finding some semblance of order and peace in his life. Bojack had a good job and his life was finally where he wanted it to be. He was away from Hollywood, or Hollywoo, and was a better person for it. And the anchor for it all was arguably his sobriety. However, his past eventually caught up with him, and all the worst things he ever did came out into public light. The final straw, with much of his life in ruins around him, was being told he was being cut out of Horsing Around, the show that had made him famous, and that he loved and defended without question or hesitation. This, and finding out that he had been manipulated into getting his friend fired years before, drove him straight back to the bottle, and a night that almost saw him killed. Number 3, Invincible killed Conquest. Invincible. There are certain superheroes that live by a code in order to protect what they stand for. Batman is one, the aforementioned Daredevil is another. Heroes who make a point never to kill, in order to prove that there's a system that works and that murder is never the answer. Invincible is another hero who lives by this rule, particularly being the son of Omni-Man, the thought-to-be superhero who leveled an entire city while telling him that no one on Earth meant anything. It was incredibly important to keep that tangible distinction between good and bad, right and wrong. He was scared of becoming like his father, and this helped prevent that. However, sometimes heroes get backed into a corner, as Mark did against Jeffrey Dean Morgan's Conquest. Angstrom Levy may have ultimately survived Mark's rage, but Conquest didn't. This was the most powerful Viltrumite anyone on Earth had ever seen, and he planned on killing everyone on the planet once he defeated Mark. Thanks to a Dark Phoenix-like blast from Eve, Invincible got his opportunity to win, and took it. Even though both his hands were shattered, the hero headbutted Conquest to death. And though it seems that Cecil has somehow brought the villain back to life, that doesn't change the fact that Mark absolutely killed him in the first place. Number 2, Jax Teller killed another son, Sons of Anarchy. Jax Teller was something of an enigma throughout Sons of Anarchy. He was the rebel among outlaws, always pushing his criminal motorcycle gang toward doing better, though he still had that fire within him and could get consumed by it just as easily as anyone else. As much as he tried to protect his family, Jax loved the Sons of Anarchy motorcycle club with everything he had, and if anyone or anything threatened it, then they became a target. This is what happened in Season 7, when someone sold the club out to rival gang leader Henry Lynn. At this point, Jax was still dealing with the death of his wife, and so his rage was never going to be quenched. He suspected Jory of ratting on the club as recompense for his dead son, and before even giving the man a chance to explain that he wasn't in fact guilty, Jax shot him in the head. The Sons of Anarchy were an organization of structure, hierarchy, and strict rules, and when Jax killed Jory, the president of the Indian Hills Charter of the Sons, he knew exactly what his penalty would be. This ultimately led to Jax's death, and one of the most jaw-dropping series finales of all time. And if it's not the most shocking of all time, you let me know what is in the comments. Number 1, The Mandalorian removed his helmet, The Mandalorian. There are so many iconic outfits and looks in Star Wars, with awesome helmets essentially being a category of its own. Of course, there's Darth Vader, Kylo Ren, and Boba Fett, as well as the franchise's latest key protagonist, the Mandalorian. By the strict laws of his religion, Din Djarin was never to remove his helmet in front of another living being. He even essentially looked down on Bo-Katan and her followers for not adhering to this rule. But he was far from perfect himself, you know. During the current 3-season stretch of The Mandalorian, Mando has removed his helmet 3 times. The first was to get a head wound treated by IG-11, though no living being saw him here. In Season 2, though, he removed it once as something of a disguise in order to find Grogu, and he did it again to say goodbye to his beloved Grogu. So heavy was the burden of breaking this ancient law, Din's travels to Mandalore with a view for forgiveness of his crime made up a decent chunk of Season 3 storyline. Naturally, the 3rd season saw him keep his helmet on at all times, so there's no way that Lucasfilm puts him front and center of the next Star Wars film, The Mandalorian and Grogu, without showing Pedro Pascal's face again, right? It's a safe bet that iconic helmet is coming off once more, at least. And if you like yourself some Star Wars stuff, then be sure to head on over to What Culture Star Wars for a ton of great lists, editorials, and so much more Force-sensitive goodness. May the Force be with you. See you in a bit.